But today we are going to be looking at Eli's wicked sons and what we can learn from them and their experience, and Eli's experience, what we can learn from those with respect to our lives today. Now, just as we always do, we're going to give a kind of a background before we go into 1 Samuel 2:12 through 29, which is one of the first ones we're going to look at, one of the first scriptures we're going to look at. But we need to give a background as to what was happening before 1 Samuel 2:12 through 29. And that is basically the details of a woman named Hannah. And Hannah prayed for a son. And she prayed in such a way that she told God, I will commit him to you, to your service, if you give me that son. She did give birth to that son. And when she delivered, she took the infant son to Eli, who was the priest there in Shiloh. And as we begin here in verse 12 of chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, we see something that I think is very interesting. It's a very direct statement. Eli's sons were scoundrels, and they had no regard for the Lord. And we could almost end it right there, but we do need to know some of the details about what they did and how they operated as priests who were supposed to follow the Levitical law, and they made up their own law. And in that regard, that's how they had no disregard. They had no disregard for the Lord. It's interesting that the author of Samuel does not name them. Most of the time when we talk about it, we don't say, oh, the secretary over at the when you were in the church office said, well, we know your name. We use your name. No, because of the fact that these two, Hophi and Phineas, with names like that, I wouldn't mention them either, but Hophi and Phineas are such reprehensible people. They get named. They don't get named. They're identified because we know Eli's sons. But then other than that, we don't know their names. And they were scoundrels. Now that's kind of an interesting word. That's sort of our generation kind of word. Today, if a teenager if you go and say, you're a scoundrel, you probably would have to get out the cell phone and do a word search here to see what scoundrel is. We certainly know what that is. And also, it also could be translated worthless, lawless men. And of course, the worst part of this is they had no regard for the Lord. Now they are priests in and of themselves, or priests, and they have assistants and they have servants who serve in Shiloh, which is where the Ark of God is located at this time. So they had a very responsible position here, and what they did with it was, well, we'll go through it. Now, it was the practice of the priests that whenever any of the people offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come with a 3-pronged fork in his hand while the meat was being boiled, and would plunge the fork into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. Whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. Okay? Now the problem is with this, we're not getting to the point of burning the fat, which is part of this process. And that was, remember, God would be very good at McDonald's or somewhere because he liked the odor of that. That was a savory odor to him, according to Scripture. So you look at this, they're not doing that, and they are using a fork, which presumably is very large, so that they can get a great deal of the meat here, rather than what should be offered to God. And whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is how they, being the priests, and this would be Eli's sons included, treated all the Israelites who came to Shiloh. But even before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the person who was sacrificing, give the priest some meat to roast. He won't accept boiled meat from you, but only raw. Now that, again, is a difference, And this was not a request. This was a directive. You will do this. Because we read in the next verse there, and if the people said to him, let the fat be burned first, and then take whatever you want, the servant would answer. You can kind of see this guy. He probably looks like Phil from Detroit. You know, he's going to do a kneecap here. No, hand it over now. If you don't, I'll take it by force. So this was not an offering. This was an extortion. You either give it to me or whammo, you're going to be forced to. So what do we think of that? What do we think of that?
Well, like you said, they had no regard for the Lord at all.
Right.
They were in it for themselves.
That's it. And sometimes in our modern world, now we of course don't do these types of sacrifices anymore, but we could say, I was trying to think of what we could do here at Green Lawn, and I will suggest this to the elders. What we'll do is, first rule that goes out, you can't bring those communion kits anymore, okay? Nobody can bring them. You have to buy them here at the church building. Okay, that's the rule. And if you don't buy them, you cannot take communion. Now, communion is an essential part of our worship service. It is, we don't do it like some of the denominations do it once a month, some do it once every, Christmas and Easter. But we do it every week because of the importance of what it represents, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Resurrection being a very important part of all of this, the shedding of the blood being a very important part of it, his giving his body for us being a very important part of and a fundamental of our faith. But what if we decided we're going to do something like that? It doesn't say in Scripture you can't charge for the communion, but what we're doing is so opposed to what God would want us to do. And would it lead to people not coming to services here? Now, when I came here from the West, we have to pretty much take what's in town. There's only usually one church. Now, there were several in Reno, but the reason there were several in Reno was they had split off for various reasons, and there were little tiny groups around town. But here, there's a choice. We can go somewhere else. Also, it doesn't say in this, but inferentially, put ourselves back into that time. How interested would we be in going to give the sacrifice to God when you got to put up with these guys and their extortionist and humiliating in some ways? The way they do that, the way they want that, we'll get it. We'll get it one way or the other. Any comments on that? I know people are shutting it off here. All right, then we'll start with verse 17, and this sums it up, and this goes very well with the two had no regard for the Lord. Verse 17, this sin of the young man was very great. It's not just a sin, it is a great sin, and it is not just a great sin, it is a very great sin in the Lord's sight. For they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. And I think we would be doing that. I tried to come up with something with this communion business, but that would be what we would be doing if we did that. Now, when that happens, how does that affect the people? I'm sure this
Makes them bitter.
It makes them bitter, exactly. And they question, why should we do this? I know God said we should do it, but this is getting pretty rough. If we don't do it the way they want it, not the way God wants it, but they want it, they'll take it from us. Any other comments?
I find it interesting, the comment that he says about their sin being very great. And I was thinking that, God seems to have a whole lot more contempt for people who mistreat his holiness, his name, his will for worship than just about anything else. You take Aaron's sons, who in the process of offering worship disregarded the holiness of God, and that was the statement that was made in Leviticus. Leviticus, that they treated God's name with contempt, and I'm not sure that has changed in God's character.
No, God's character remains constant. And that's why when we look at the Ten Commandments, the first three deal with relationship with God. And it is one of, we worship him, one of respect and not contempt and not, we're going to do it our way. We don't care what you say. Very good points. Any other comments? You know what's interesting about this with a smaller group, we're getting more comments. So next week, I won't be here, so you guys can go ahead and comment on what you want. All right, now we get down to verse 18 there. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord. Now Samuel is, we're going to see two tracks here. We're going to see Phineas and Hophi, Eli's wicked sons, and we're going to see Samuel. Now they're both at essentially the same location because Samuel has been committed to the Lord. And we're going to see two different reactions here. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy. Now he's still a boy, and he's going to be a boy pretty much throughout what we're reading today, wearing a linen ephod. And an ephod is just kind of, some say it's kind of like an apron, others say it's like a tunic, but that's what he wore to perform his duties. Each year, his mother made him a little robe. Well, I hope it got bigger as he grew older, because and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. So here's Hannah and her husband Elkanah, who are being subjected to the same treatment as everybody else, but they continue to go up there every year to offer their annual sacrifice. And I'm sure most did. There may have been some who didn't, but still. And then what happens here is Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, "May the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord." And that's a positive for Eli. He's not going to come out of this with a very high grade, as we will see, but still, he is trying here, at least under these circumstances. Then they would go home, and the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. So that was wonderful, wasn't it? Here she, and Samuel is still serving in Eli's presence there. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel, here's still a boy, grew up in the presence of the Lord. Now that's important because he's growing up in the presence of the Lord. He is learning what he's supposed to learn. And he is doing what he's supposed to do. Now, of course, it's in Eli, he is growing up in Eli's presence, but the presence of the Lord is the more important of the two. Because as we see, presumably, Eli's 2 sons grew up in his presence.
Well, I think Eli let them get away with things he shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
He was too lenient on his sons.
Yeah, and then when he gets to the point where he really lays down the law, they don't listen to him.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that here. Because why wouldn't they listen to it? They're thinking, "Hey, Dad, we've been doing this for years. This ain't going to change, buddy. I don't care what you say." You know? And it goes to what Dale was saying, for those of you who were in the second service, this is a spoiler alert. It will talk about respect, family respect, respecting the father, respecting the husband, respecting the mother, respecting all of that, the wife. Those things are important. It starts there. And especially when the circumstances are the sons of Eli become the priests as well, because he's in that lineage of priesthood from Aaron down, and he is, so they were destined when born to be in this position. Okay, now, the next part, we show a little bit more light on Eli's sons. Now, Eli was very old. And I guess it was a couple of weeks ago I talked about the little girl who thought 35 was very old. No, he's a lot older than that, like about 3 times that almost. And heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel. So we now know that Eli can't claim, wow, I didn't know they were doing that. He knows it. He knows everything that they're doing. And how they slept, here's another thing, how they slept with women who served at the entrance of the tent of the meeting. And that's where the ark is in the tent of the meeting. So here, this is going beyond what he was doing as far as showing disrespect and contempt for God by not doing the sacrifices properly. They're just flaunting it. This is just, I can get away with it, so I'm going to do it. I worked for a guy one time who told me it's not a crime if you can get away with it. Now, that was not in the DA's office, by the way. That was in the, it was a summer job when I was going to college, but it was one of those things that, okay, it's not a crime. Unless you get away, if you can get away with it.
Yeah, he's probably in jail by now.
I think he's probably dead, because he was pretty old at that time. And that was a long time ago, and as we were saying, 35 looks old. Well, yeah, it looks pretty young now. We passed 35 so long ago, I can't even remember it. Okay, anyway, so enough about the old age. So he said to them, so now Eli is going to say probably what he should have said many, many years before. Because we get the idea that this has been going on for some time. This is not just, it happened last year, but for the first time when the annual sacrificing was being done. Why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. So this is not, I mean, he knows it. He knows what's going on. No, my sons, the report I hear spreading among the Lord's people is not good. Well, that's an understatement there. But he's getting the point there. If one person sins against another, God, or some translations say the judges, or the judge may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? And especially if it's unrepentant. And this is about as not repented for as you can get. They do whatever they want, whenever they want, and don't care about it.
Well, I think it also shows the long-suffering patience he had for them to change until he just couldn't take it anymore. You know what I mean? God just said, okay, enough is enough.
Because sometimes we can look at that, we can say, well, why didn't he not do something earlier? Well, because he was a patient man, and it's pretty tough. I would not want to be Eli. Because it would be difficult to have 2 sons who did that. Now, some people would say, well, if I were their father, they wouldn't be around me. Well, maybe so. But again, it's only a crime if you can get away with it, if you get caught doing that. But you get the point here. He is on the horns of a dilemma, but it's rough. It's rough for him. And now he's very old. Let's see. His sons, however, put their earbuds in and didn't hear him. Did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. All right, we got to stop there for a minute, because some people might say, wait a minute. Is God behind all this bad behavior so he can put him to death?
No.
No. What does that mean when it says that?
God's had enough. I mean, he let them get away with it so long, and now he's had enough. He allowed them time to change their ways, and they didn't take it.
And in fact, Eli goes in,
Mhm.
because what would have happened if Eli had said all of this and they say, Father, we've sinned? It would be like we talked about before, where they have repented. No,
They
they're not
didn't do
even
that.
listening to it, much less repenting. They're not responding to the message, they don't listen to it.
But it's kind of like Paul said, or the Hebrew writer said, that if we sin willfully after having received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins.
Right.
God can harden the heart to his will. We think that we're in control, that we can sin anytime we want, and we don't have any respect for God. And God can harden our hearts, and he warns us about that in the scriptures. And when he hardens our heart, there's no way that we can repent, because we're deluded into the fact that we no longer have any inclination of what the truth means.
And I think that's a very good point in light of how far they have strayed.
Yeah,
This may be, as the old saying goes, the tip of the iceberg, what they're doing, because I'm sure if they were having sex with women in front of the tent of the meeting, and doing these other things with respect to the sacrifices, who knows what else may have been going on. As we can conjecture, I think we can infer that probably this is not all what was happening. One of the common comments I would make on that is when we go back to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and you recall from our year-long study of the story, when we studied that period of time, we looked at whether, did God actually go in and say, zap, your heart is hard. Whoops, I'm gonna knock this chair over. And then somebody else will have to take over. But we look at that. Did he harden the heart, or did he know who Pharaoh was, and that Pharaoh, when confronted with the 10 plagues, when he resisted 9 of them, 9 of the plagues, and then it was on the 10th one that he reneged, but God knew he wasn't sincere, right? So you could look at it both ways. Yes, he can harden a heart if it's for his use, and I think that's probably what happened here too, because these guys were not going to
Repent or even listen.
they're not listening, and they're not repenting, and they're what? Starts with a Y. Young. We learn when they are killed, they're young. And it was necessary to do it to stop this nonsense. Because if they lived as long, what was Eli, I think it was 98 years old when he died? And we'll get to that today. It's in a way comical. It's not quite getting your hair stuck in the tree, but it's sort of another version of it. All right, any other comments? Now let's go, I should say, look up and see if there are any other comments.
Kind of the underlying character was greed and power.
Yes, it was, absolutely. And does that,
Kind of goes through the ages, doesn't it?
it does. There are no greedy or power-seeking people today, right? That's all history. And in fact, regrettably, it's in the church.
Well, it was in the priesthood.
What's that?
It was in the priesthood.
There you go. And if you, we had an individual who was not selected to be an elder. Okay, he had submitted himself. His name had been submitted, but he was not selected. Now, one of the reasons was he'd been married and divorced 4 times. Okay, and it was not what we call a scriptural reason for divorce. On some of them, so the membership did all. Well, what did he do? He said, "Okay, fine. I'm going to go establish my own little church." That goes to that power hungry. Because he did not want to be an elder at all for the right reasons. He wanted it because of the status it would give him and the power that he would have. So,
And you meet people like that all over the place. I mean, I've seen people that they're in it for the power.
Yeah.
And usually it turns out bad for them, but they're in it for the prestige.
yes, and regrettably, it may end badly for them, but along the way, you can kind of see the bodies piling up, if you will, as a metaphor. Any other comments? Okay.
Well, yeah, I just wonder how many people are turned off by religion because of the hypocrisy that you see in so many people that claim to be religious and claim to have a faith in God. And yet their lives are very hypocritical.
Right.
And that's kind of where, these people, they had no regard for God whatsoever. And it says they were wicked. They had become extremely wicked, and there was no hope for them.
Well, I've known some people that change churches depending upon who they're working for. They just go to whatever church the boss is going to, basically, to try to, get in good with the boss, basically, is what all they were doing.
For the crass thing, kissing up.
Yeah, basically.
It's kind of, yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, any other comments? We're gonna have to do this more often. The other people can just stay away. No, we're not saying that, but we get more comments, I think, when
Be
we.
careful, they may be on the.
You guys can still watch there. You can't ask questions or comments. There's supposed to be a way that they can, but I
Well, yeah, but you gotta sit there and watch everything they type out.
Yeah, I get to look at the chat.
Yeah, I have to look
yeah,
at
they
that
can do the
screen.
chat thing, right. And most, well, the class I taught before I came down here, last quarter, is known as God's waiting room, because it is the oldest group of saints here at Green Lawn, and they like that term. But most of them probably would not know how to do that. And then I find out that probably one of the oldest who was watching it could do it. And I'm thinking, I can't. And here he is. He's old enough to be my father. He could do it. All right. Anyway, now, that's a little trip down memory lane. We'll finish up here at verse 26 of Samuel 2, and then we will continue with the prophecy against the house of Eli. And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature, which means he's growing up as a man physically, and in favor with the Lord and with the people. So there is a man who can serve both the Lord and the people.
Mhm.
And there are people who can do that. It isn't an either or. It can be both. All right, now, here we go. Prophecy against the house of Eli. This sounds like something we would see on the Late Late Show or some great movie, an old black and white movie. Starting at verse 27 there of chapter 2. Now a man of God, we know this to be what? Prophet, came to Eli.
He's coming to the source of the problem, basically.
Yeah. The God's had enough of this, so we're gonna go directly here. And said to him, and this is the quote here, this is what the Lord says. Now, if we are Eli, what should we be doing?
Paying real close attention.
There you go. This is not like the sons did with Eli, because this is very important stuff here. Even though what Eli said was very important, but this is really, did I not clearly reveal myself to your ancestors' family when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh? He is going back. God is going back saying, well, look here, Eli. When your ancestors, your family, was in Egypt, didn't I reveal things to them that you should know and you should do? I chose your ancestor out of all of the tribes of Israel to be my priest. Okay? Now, Eli's ancestor, according to the textbook or the book we're working with, is Ithamar, who is the son of Aaron. I mean, it doesn't get much closer, does it? When you're when they're dealing with Aaron, and then Ithamar. So he is in the lineage. Eli is in that lineage. And this is select. This is not like priests are selected. Well, for example, let's not say priests, let's say ministers. We don't have a lineage of ministers. Dale's father was not his grandfather, and his sons and so forth. That is not how it's done today. But this was very, very well set out, and that's the way it was. Now, did I not choose your ancestor out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, and to wear the ephod in my presence? I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you? Oh, he's getting right there. Why? And it's plural according to one of the footnotes. The you is plural, but it is Eli to whom the man of God is speaking at this point. So Eli is one of the yous in this case.
It's kind of like saying you and yours.
Yes, exactly. Scorn my sacrifice, an offering that I prescribed for my dwelling. This is not something that a group of priests met and came up with, this is how we're going to worship. This is directly from God. This is spelled out. And I know when we studied Leviticus and Deuteronomy during that 1 year-long study, people were so excited about everything that's in Leviticus because, I mean, it could get very detailed. And it was for a reason. That's the way he wanted it. Then, why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel? Now that should have hit home very close. That should have hit right in the heart with Eli, because God knows what's going on, and he's not happy with it. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, says this prophet as he continues, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me, I will honor. But those who despise me will be disdained. This is what Dale talked about with the respect at the first service today. With respect, we can't expect respect if we're not willing to give it. And that's what we're saying here. How in the world can you expect me to honor that promise that this is going to go through you when this mess has been created? When you are dishonoring me, disdaining me? The time is coming. Oh, whenever God talks to somebody, the time is coming. It can be good, it can be bad, and it's bad here. It's coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your priestly house, so that no one in it will reach old age. Well, Eli already has, but there are two others on the chopping block here, so to speak, who have not reached it. And you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, no one in your family line will ever reach old age. Well, every one of you that I do not cut off from serving, every one of you that I do not cut off from serving at my altar, I will spare only to destroy your sight and sap your strength, and all your descendants will die in the prime of life. Whoa, how would we like to hear that? Those of you who are parents, how would you like it when you were parents that had children who were not quite to the prime of life yet? How would you like to hear that? This is over.
Basically, it's a death sentence once you reach 25, basically, is what it ends up being.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And, of course, the man of God focus is there, verse 34, back on the wicked sons. And again, they're actually named here. This is the first time we actually get much of a name here. And what happens to your two sons, Hophni and Phineas, will be a sign to you. They will both die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and mind. I will firmly establish his priestly house, and they will minister before my anointed one always. Then everyone left in your family line will come and bow down before him for a piece of silver and a loaf of bread, and plead, appoint me to some priestly office so I can have food to eat. Well, does the punishment fit the offenses? And it does. It does. And as we know, as one of the commentators said, the priest God will arise as likely Zadok, a descendant of Aaron, through Eleazar. You know, we have to go through all of that. We won't go through the son of, the son of, the son of, all the way down. But this is where it comes from. And Zadokites will be priests who adhere strictly to God's commands. And those priests in Eli's line will be servants to his priestly line. So they basically have lost the position that they had occupied. All right, let's jump over to 1 Samuel 3, starting at verse 1. The boy, Samuel, he's still a boy, ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, and there were not many visions. So this is kind of one of those periods where I think God has, with what he had the man of God tell Eli that was going to happen, he had taken care of that problem, and now we're kind of in a, not like the 400 years of so-called silence, but there's a period of time here. Now, one night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here am I." What did he do? And ran to Eli. Ran to Eli. Now look at Samuel versus Hophni and Phineas. Hophni and Phineas don't even listen to their father. Samuel thinks he hears the father call. He is up and nearby. An obedient servant. Here am I, you called me. But Eli said, I did not call you. Go back and lie down. So he went back and lay down. Eli says, he thinks Eli says, come, he comes. Eli says, no, go, he goes. That must have been nice for Eli to have somebody who at least listened to him and did what he said. Quite different. Again, the Lord called Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I did not call you, go back and lie down. And now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him at verse 7. But we hear a third time, the Lord called Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli, and said, here I am, you called me. So you can see, most kids at that, probably at his age, well, the second time this happens, I'm not getting up at this point. But he is very obedient, and he thinks Eli is calling. And he, in spite of what we say about Eli, Samuel respected him. This is just a very clear, I think a very clear evidence of that. And then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, go and lie down. And if he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as the other time, Samuel, Samuel. And then Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. He did exactly what Eli told him to do. And the Lord said to Samuel, And he's revealing this now to Samuel. See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. They're not going to like what's coming. Not going to like it. It's like sometimes, what is it? Your ears tingle when somebody's talking about you or whatever. Were your ears tingling this morning? Because we were all talking about you. But anyway, their ears are going to tingle. And at that time, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family. So what has been spoken is the boys are going to die, and he's not going to be they're not going to be in the lineage anymore from beginning to end. For I told him I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. So they get the blasphemy, but he knew about it, and he didn't do anything to restrain them. Therefore, I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by a sacrifice or offering. And we don't have in the record that Eli repented either when the man of God came to him. We certainly know that the two sons did not, the wicked sons did not.
Well, you would have expected Eli to, torn his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes if he truly repented, but apparently he didn't do that.
No, because I think that because of all we're seeing here, I think that would be very important to include in the record.
Yeah.
Because that's what he did, but you're right, he did not do that. He didn't even say, as Achan said, I have sinned. He didn't even say that. All right. Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision. But Eli, and this is interesting what Eli does here next. But Eli called him and said, Samuel, my son. Samuel answered, here I am. This really was Eli called. So he was there. What is it he, that is God, said to you? And now Eli, who has these unrepentant sons, do not hide it from me. May God deal with you. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you. Well, he can control, he can get people to talk to him and do things, but he didn't do it with his son. So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. And then Eli said, he is the Lord, let him do what is good in his eyes. And that's an interesting, he's recognizing what we know, God is in control. He's going to do what he's going to do. And it doesn't change. The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up and let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. That is a way of saying that his prophecies came true. And Israel, and all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself through Samuel, or to Samuel through the word. Now, let's go to, we're going to look here at the death. We're going into chapter 4. We're going to have to pick up the pace here just a little bit. Chapter 4. What goes on before we get to chapter 4 of 1 Samuel, starting in verse 12, is this all happened in one day. The following: 1, the Philistines defeated Israel. 2, all the Israelite men fled to their tents, ran from the Philistines in defeat. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. That was a slaughter. The Philistines captured the Ark of the Lord, or the Ark of God, a humiliation to Israel, to lose that. And then, probably the best thing that happened all day was Hophi and Phineas died. And now that was all in one day. Could you imagine you're the ABC commentator or CNN, and you're now talking about here are the headline news. And man, it's just, it does not get good. It does not get good. And then, on this same day, we're starting at verse 12, that same day a Benjaminite ran from the battle line and went to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he arrived, there was Eli sitting on his chair by the side of the road watching, because his heart feared for the ark of God. When the man entered the town and told what had happened, the whole town sent up a cry. Can you imagine getting all of that news at once? The man hurried over to Eli, who was then 98 years old, and whose eyes had failed so that he could not see. He told Eli, I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this very day. So he's giving a report on the battle. It ain't going good. Eli asked, what happened, my son? The man who brought the news replied, Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army has suffered heavy losses. I'd say 30,000 lost would be. And her two sons, Hophi and Phineas, are dead. And this is the worst part of all of this, the ark of God has been captured. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken, and he died. For he was an old man, and he was heavy, and he had led Israel, or had judged Israel, for 40 years. Now he had a long term. And as we discussed last week, we looked at Saul's 40-year reign, David's 40-year reign, and Solomon's 40-year reign. But after that, the kings, some of them didn't serve very long at all, and some never got that close to 40 years, I believe. Anyway, it gets worse yet. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phineas, who's now dead, was pregnant at the time of her delivery. She heard the news, and she puts it apparently in this order, that the ark of God had been captured, and that her father-in-law, Eli, and her husband, Phineas, were dead. She went into labor and gave birth, but was overcome by her labor pains. As she was dying, so we now see the lineage, the line, even the in-laws are dying. The woman attending her said, don't despair. Well, that's easy for you to say. You're just attending her. You're not the one in pain. You have given birth to a son. But she did not respond or pay any attention. She did name the son what? Ichabod. And what does that mean? No glory, right? How would you like to be named Ichabod? Any of you name your children Ichabod? I hope not. I hope not. The glory has departed from Israel because of the capture of the ark of God and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. She hadn't focused on the right thing. That had to be the most, what we would consider serious matter that day. And I realized losing 30,000 foot soldiers is not a normal event. But that day, that was a bad day. When we think of, man, I'm having a bad day, maybe we ought to kind of think about this. Not as bad as that. Any comments?
Yeah, not to mention the fact that the son she just bore isn't going to live that long. She's
No.
going to die young.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And isn't that really that is really a sad thing to think about. We know sometimes children are born, and because of whatever has happened, they're not expected to live very long. But every one of them is not going to live very long. And if Ichabod has a child, that child's not going to live very long. Anything else? You want to know what we're doing next week?
What are we doing next week?
We're having a picnic. But you would say, wow, this is all, the whole thing has been a picnic so far. All right, next week we're going to look at Doeg. D-O-E-G, Doeg. I've never heard of this dude, this individual, but he is known as the opportunist. And this is in 1 Samuel, about the 21st chapter, 1 through 9, and 22, 6 through 19. We may add some more things to that. But and the lessons we've learned from this are very obvious. Things don't get controlled unless bad things like Eli had with his sons will not get any better unless he intervenes. And he didn't. And as a result, his lineage had a real, well, shall we say, freshness date on every one of those born. Any other comments? Thank you so much for your contributions. We thank you who are doing distance learning. We appreciate you. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, anything else?